So today I wanted to share with you guys a definition of codependency that I feel like not only does it resonate and make sense, but when you understand this part of it, it's what helps you to start learning how to overcome the codependency. Okay, so most of the time when I read information about codependency, it's always this list of symptoms. It's never like an explanation of this is the root cause of it, this is where it comes from. It's always just symptoms. For example, I'm going to read to you a list of symptoms that I just looked up, and I'm sure you've heard a lot of these symptoms, but notice what they are. Having a hard time saying no, having poor boundaries, showing emotional reactivity, feeling compelled to take care of people, having trouble communicating honestly, fixating on mistakes, feeling a need to be liked by everyone, feeling a need to always be in a relationship, denying one's own needs, thoughts, and feelings, confusing love and pity, displaying fear of abandonment. So those are just some common symptoms of codependency. It's not an all-inclusive list. There are many others, but those are just some symptoms. Just because we have the symptoms doesn't mean that we now have this understanding and we understand the underlying root cause of those symptoms. So for me, for example, the need to understand it compared to symptoms is really important to me. Like, I need to understand something in order to really pick it apart and learn how to work through it. So just to give an illustration, let's say I want to explain pregnancy to an alien. Not saying I believe in aliens, just bear with me for this illustration, okay? So I'm explaining pregnancy and I'm like, okay, so suddenly you're going to start vomiting every morning. You're going to feel nauseous throughout the day. You're going to develop a heightened sense of smell. And things that you used to like the smell of now are going to make you sick. You're going to get some weird dreams. At least I did. You're going to start gaining weight, and it's pretty much going to be the majority of it in your midsection. And because of that, you're going to kind of feel off balance. You're going to have difficulty sleeping, and your appetite is going to increase. Okay, those are all symptoms of pregnancy. They're all symptoms, but they don't explain why you're having those symptoms, right? Whereas the underlying cause is there is a life inside of you, and it's growing, and these are the side effects of that. Well, the reason I explain that is because with codependency, I always feel like there's all these symptoms and no one's saying, hey, well, this is the root cause. And I finally found a definition that I feel like finally explains it. And I want to share it with you. And I found this under a myth where somebody was asking if codependency is a mental illness. And the answer was, codependency is neither a mental illness nor indicative of a risk for developing one. Rather, codependency is a pattern of learned behaviors that serve to protect oneself from the feeling of being out of control. Think about that. It is a pattern of learned behaviors that you develop as a coping skill of being out of control. So how did this make sense to me? Okay, so I thought about when I was very codependent in the past, and I thought about the behaviors that I exhibited, because while there's this overall, definition of what the symptoms are, not everyone has the same symptoms. So when I evaluated mine, for example, just to talk about two of them, one of them was, annihilate self to please others. Be whatever that person wants and needs in order to make them happy. And another one was having no boundaries, not even knowing what a boundary was, okay? So I think about those two symptoms. And with this definition, and this is why I feel like this definition is so important, because it starts helping you to make sense of your personal symptoms. So I thought, okay, that was my symptom, annihilation of self to make others happy, or no boundaries. Then I asked myself, well, why would that have been a coping skill or a learned behavior that I had to have in order to feel some measure of control? And I thought about where those behaviors started. And growing up in an environment where it was extremely dysfunctional, being yourself, being authentic was met with rejection or anger. Having a different perspective was met with anger, rage, or the silent treatment. So what does a child do in that situation? Those behaviors, the rage, the silent treatment, the punishment for being yourself, is extremely emotionally distressing to a child, especially if those behaviors are being inflicted by the person that's supposed to be loving and taking care of that child. So what does the child do? They develop coping skills to try to minimize the emotional abuse or the emotional damage that's taking place. The thinking in the brain that happens on a subconscious level, because it's not like the child has the emotional maturity to understand what's going on, but their brain starts to notice authenticity, danger, having your own perspective, punishment, and what that does is, okay, what that connection starts to do is it develops a coping skill. And the brain actually discourages the child to display those things as a form of protection. So, as a result, in an effort to minimize the emotional distress that's going on at home, you learn, oh, boundaries are bad. Boundaries mean I'm going to get punished. Boundaries mean that, mom or dad don't love me. Boundaries mean that I'm a bad kid. Boundaries mean that I'm selfish. And they develop that coping skill of not having boundaries or not being authentic. And even though that coping skill helped them in childhood, right, or at least it tried to help them to have less emotional distress, what happens is it becomes hardwired into your psyche, and those behaviors become a part of your personality, now called codependency, and the coping skills are now maladaptive. And now the having no boundaries, the annihilation of self to make somebody else happy, what does that do? That attracts the exact kind of person that you were trying to protect yourself from in childhood. But we don't make that connection. We often don't make that connection. So with this video, what I encourage you to do, what I really encourage you to do is, if you in any way, shape, or form wonder if you have any parts of codependency, any symptoms of codependency, and you want to make the most value of this video, get out a piece of paper, and step one is to write down the symptoms that apply to you, the ones that resonate with you. If you don't know what all of the symptoms of codependency are, do a quick Google search. Read it over, and whatever resonates with you, put on a piece of paper. Step two is to figure out how this behavior was a coping skill. In other words, what you're doing is you're finding the origin. You're finding why you started developing this behavior. And when you do that, what you're actually doing is those programs, those behaviors that took place in childhood, they become part of our subconscious programming. And we're playing them and carrying them out and repeating them over and over until they're in our conscious awareness. So by putting it out on a piece of paper, you're actually bringing it into your conscious awareness. And that's when you can start changing it. And once it's on that piece of paper, that's when you can start changing it. So figure out why that was a coping skill. Now that you understand why it was a coping skill, that puts a distance between the behavior and your mind now, right? The third step is to ask yourself, is this a coping skill that is now working in your life? Is this the same thought patterns that you had as a child, the behaviors you were doing to keep yourself safe, are they keeping you safe now? Okay, once you help your mind to see that this is no longer working for you, this is not keeping you safe, the fourth step is to reach an understanding as to what thoughts, feelings, and actions you want to have instead of this coping skill. So for example, I'll use myself as an example. In regards to annihilation of self to please others, right? So now I have that. I wrote down where it was from. I recognize it is not helping my life right now. If anything, it's attracting toxic people. It's causing me to be in relationships that are not healthy. It's making me unhappy. It's making me not feel authentic. So I get all of that, right? That's step three. So step 4 is, what do I need to think, feel, and do instead of this coping skill? And let's start with the thoughts. I need to think or realize that it's okay if others don't like me. My life is not dependent on them liking me. As a child, it was. As a child, there's that feeling of, if your caregivers don't like you, then they're not going to take care of you. So there's a life and death situation about it. But coming to terms with it as an adult, I have to realize that while it may not feel comfortable if people don't like me, while I don't enjoy people looking negative at me, my life isn't in danger. It's okay. Another thought that would be helpful for me is, I like me enough, and that's enough for me. Where as a child, I couldn't, generate my own self-love at a young age and expect it to be enough. Children need external validation. They need to be liked to learn how to have that self-love. But as an adult, I can now generate my own self-love. I can generate my own acceptance of who my authentic self is. So I start thinking that thought. Another thought that would be helpful is, people are allowed to not like me. They're allowed. It's not my job to control how they feel. And I'm still allowed to like me even if they don't. So these are thoughts that, as I bring them into my conscious awareness, anytime that feeling of feeling like I need to annihilate self starts coming up in my body, I now have thoughts that I can say that can help calm and ease that emotion. The feelings that I would need to generate along with those thoughts are self-love, self-acceptance, forgiveness, compassion. Compassion for myself when I make a mistake. Compassion for myself if people don't like me. Compassion for my imperfections. Those are feelings that I would need to start putting into practice. And the actions that I would need to take is to actually, and this is the scary part, but it's to actually start revealing my authentic self. Start saying no if I don't like something. Start being myself, showing myself, instead of worrying about how others think I am. Start being. So those would be my thoughts, my feelings, and my actions that would be needed to overturn that coping skill. I challenge you, if you're battling codependency, if you're feeling like you're repeating patterns and you're hopping from video to video and trying to understand it, get as much understanding as you can, but I promise you, if you take the time to pick it apart, to get to the heart of what your coping skills are, why they came about, and you overturn your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions, you can break out of codependency.